Yes, my name is Eileen. My pronouns are she and her. Who here would consider themselves to be spiritual beings? I expect if I was to ask for a show of hands, most of you would have your hands up. Because everyone searches for meaning. Everyone needs relationship with others, with themselves, with something beyond themselves. We are all spiritual beings. In the great commandment to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, we are reminded that we are spiritual, physical, and emotional beings with a mind. Today marks the beginning of Mental Health Week. So with this focus today on mental health, I could ask, who has experienced challenges with their mental health? Or supported someone in your family, or perhaps a friend? Hands might not go up quite so readily. You may want to say, not me. And to that I would reply, that's highly unlikely. Because mental health is dynamic and mental health issues are everywhere. Throughout our lives, we will all experience seasons of languishing and flourishing in each of these areas, spiritual, physical, and emotional, and mental. And today we will consider that throughout our lives, our minds move between mental health and mental illness, surviving and thriving. All areas of our lives fluctuate and present challenges, including not only physical and spiritual, but also emotional and mental. As I said, our mental health is dynamic, and God holds all of it because God cares. This week, because of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and as you know, it's become for us Orange Shirt Day, some of us have focused a little bit more on the experiences, but also the teachings of our Indigenous neighbors. In an article called Love and Work, I should have done that. There we go. In an article called Love and Work, Itinerant Perspectives on the Well-Being of Mennonites in the Americas, John Elias reminds us, and I quote, our Indigenous people of North America have a concept which is useful in thinking about our mental health, and it's the medicine wheel or circle of well-being. It regards the mind, body, soul, and spirit as four inseparable parts of a person, so that one's thinking, physical being, emotions, and spiritual connection to the Creator all together determine one's well-being. All parts of the wheel need to work together in balance. He goes on to say, this concept resonates well with Mennonite understanding. As Mennonites, we have long believed that mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being are all integrated, combined. To be healthy, we need to be well and disciplined in all of these dimensions, unquote. We may not want to admit that our mental health can fluctuate. We resist anything that's a downer. For instance, we just heard Psalm 42 read. It's not a happy psalm, and some people dislike the psalms because they find them to be depressing. Others, who are more comfortable with feelings of sadness or even anger, find them to be refreshingly honest. My Monday morning devotional this week began with a song by Paul Zach, which I will play for you shortly. I noted that it no sooner started playing than I was in tears. How does that happen? Clearly, I had more going on in my head and my heart than I was acknowledging, and those tears were closer to the surface than I knew. Sometimes it takes a song for us to recognize that as humans, we experience a whole range of emotions, to realize that our emotions hold both joy and sorrow and everything in between. We can't ignore those difficult feelings because we all have stuff. We all have struggles. There are times when we can't see past tomorrow, when we can see past tomorrow, and there are times when we can't. So have a listen.
Sorrow's got a hold on me. The shadows is all I see. way down. No, I can't break free. Sorrow's got a hold on me.
You are quite possibly familiar with the TV series, This Is Us. From that title, you may correctly deduce that my sermon title, Not Just Them, is a way to say, this is us, without getting accused of theft of intellectual property. When it comes to poverty, we like to think that's someone else's issue. We tend to forget the time that we bought 2 movie theater tickets and shared 1 popcorn and 1 drink because that was all the money we had. When it comes to gender issues, we like to think that this is not us, not in our family. When it comes to Indigenous issues, we tend to forget that we are all treaty people. And when it comes to mental health, it's so very easy to point to just a few people and forget that nearly all of us have struggles at some time in our lives. And that within our own families or within our own circles of friends, there are those who suffer significantly with their own mental health. We may not know about it. Fear, stigma, and judgment are all factors that can keep us silent. A woman named Sabra Schmidt, in response to a blog post, said, "You can have cancer and it is all right. But if you have a mental illness, most of us are taught to hide it. And many times, it's the hiding that hurts the most." In a TV documentary called Hidden in Plain View, which aired back in June, they said that mental health challenges affect us all, in the workplace, in school, in our families. They stated while that different for each person, it can begin at any age, and that 50% of mental illness begins before the age of 13. They added the sad fact that our systems, which were not well equipped to deal with kids and youth mental health before 2020, are less well equipped now. I fully expect that is true. Virginia Gerbrandt-Richard, in a Canadian Mennonite article, states that, according to recent research by the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, 1 in 5 adults experiences some kind of mental health disorder or illness in a given year. And this figure is not much different whether individuals believe in God or not, or are a Christian or go to church. She doesn't say this, but I wonder if those are the same people from year to year. I highly doubt it. She acknowledges that, as with all statistics, the figure is a broad average, and we can think it might not be the reality in our community, but then again, she says, it might be. In any case, this statistic can alert us to the fact that mental illness is a reality in our world, one that we can't ignore, for it is affecting our world and our community. It is affecting us and our faith, unquote. I myself can recall many years ago thinking that it would be best for me to leave this world. As soon as the words came into my head, I realized that was not a rational thought. This was depression talking. Your thoughts may not be as extreme, but I think that when we find ourselves believing that mental health issues are only about others and that there are just a few, in fact, this is us. I expect that mental health challenges have been with us since the beginning of time. Although we tend not to focus on them, they are found in the Bible as well. Remember the story of King Saul, for whom David played his harp? Have a look at that face. It is the face of a troubled man. The spirit of Yahweh then departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from Yahweh tormented him. Saul's attendants said to Saul, "See, an evil spirit from God torments you. You should order your attendants to search for someone who can play the harp, which will soothe your mind when this evil spirit from God is upon you, and you will feel better." Saul put out the word, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." And so they found David. Whenever the evil spirit from God would fall upon Saul, David would take up the harp and play. Then Saul would be relieved, would feel better, and the evil spirits would vanish. In today's language, we would likely not call it the evil spirit from God. We would probably say that Saul was depressed. This was a recurring experience for him. He was having more than just a bad day. It was something deeper. The Canadian Mennonite article that I mentioned earlier notes that depression is more than just a bad day or feelings of sadness in response to life's struggles. Depression is a mental illness that affects people's moods. Moods impact the way people think about themselves, relate to others, and interact with the world around them, according to the Canadian Mennonite Health Association. Depression can keep people from functioning normally, include such things as feeling helpless, hopeless, and worthless, unquote. As we know, David himself had his struggles. Listen to these verses from Psalm 38. "Hear my prayer, Yahweh, and my cry for help. Listen to my weeping and don't ignore me. I'm an alien with you, a stranger, as were all my ancestors. Look away from me and let me rejoice once again, or I'll leave this life and be no more." You will remember the story of Jonah. It turns out that he hated the Ninevites so much that he didn't want God to forgive them. Sent to warn the people of Nineveh, he became so angry at God's mercy and compassion when they repented, so caught up in what he saw as the injustice of it all, that he says, "And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Or there's the story of the prophet Elijah. In this story, Elijah is fleeing from Queen Jezebel because she is threatening to kill him. Here's the story. Full of fear, Elijah fled for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his attendant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Yahweh," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel of Yahweh touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there near his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate the cake and drank the water and then lay down again. A commentator on this passage notes, instead of feeling victorious, Elijah felt hopeless, alone, and afraid. He had low self-esteem and wanted to die. He wanted to sleep and had to be encouraged to get up and nourish himself. Elijah, a prophet, biblical hero, and a person of faith, was seriously depressed. They add, "When I'm depressed, I feel hopeless, alone, and afraid, and like a failure. Occasionally, I blame myself for my situation and have thoughts of self-harm, sometimes of suicide. While I may overeat, I often don't nourish myself by doing things I enjoy and find meaningful. Instead, I sleep or watch Law and Order." Maybe you can identify. This is not optimum mental health. So throughout Scripture, we see biblical figures such as Saul and David, Jonah and Elijah, dealing with deep feelings of despair, anger, depression, or loneliness. Virginia Gerbrand-Richard reminds us, these stories are a part of the story of God's people, and they are a part of our story. They are still a part of our experience today. It is a part of the lives of so many people within our world and within our church and community. Many are hurting. Although the Bible doesn't specifically address mental health, what is constant in the Bible is that God is close to those who are suffering. Even the psalm writers call on God for deliverance and recognize God as their strength and source of comfort. To you, Yahweh, I lift up my soul. My God, I trust in you. My eyes are always on you, Yahweh, for you will pick my feet out of the snare. Turn to me, be gracious to me, for I am lonely and anguished. How heavy are the troubles of my heart. Free me from my distress. Look at my affliction and my trouble, and mend all my brokenness. The New Testament, if anything, is more clear. God cares about those we might consider weak. From Jesus' birth narrative, where Jesus first of all comes to earth as a baby, born of an ordinary woman, in fact, a young girl, we are told, born in a barn, no less, whose birth was first announced to a crew of unshowered shepherds. Jesus, whose resurrection was first made known to a woman, and who, while on earth, preached what is well known as the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who are mourning. They will be consoled. Blessed are those who are gentle. They will inherit the land. This is not a prosperity gospel. From Jesus' birth to life, to death and resurrection, the image is clear. God cares. God cares about the poor and the poor in spirit. God cares about the weak and despairing. God absolutely cares about those who are suffering and brokenhearted. Virginia Richard notes that one of the ways we are shown that God cares for our mental health is that we are provided with the things we need: a great therapist, access to medication, time with God, a good support system, and all of the above. Loving God with our minds can mean utilizing some of these things that God provides. Unquote. God provides because God cares about the poor in spirit. Therapists can be helpful. Last winter, when I found myself crying whenever I started my morning devotions, I knew something was not right and began considering going back to the counselor I'd seen a number of years ago. Yet, although counselors are trained to respect their clients' faith, I wasn't sure that my old counselor would still be a good fit. Then by chance, or what I call circumstances beyond circumstance, in other words, God stepping in, I learned of a counselor who I recognized as having a strong faith. I signed up with her and have been seeing her regularly ever since. It's amazing what an understanding ear and a different perspective can do for a person. There are those who believe that using medication to improve mental health shows a lack of trust in God. Not so. Struggles with mental health can be caused by chemical imbalances not unlike any other physical illnesses. Scripture shows God's people using elements from the earth, such as leaves and figs, to assist in the healing process from physical ailments. And taking medication in the midst of mental illness does not show a lack of faith in the ability of God to sustain us through the suffering. Just as taking medication for other physical ailments is the responsible thing to do, taking medication for our brains can mean we are taking responsibility for our part in the matter of healing. Spending time with God can change our perspective too. Sometimes we just need a safe space to slow down, take the time to self-reflect, connect to God, to ourselves, and to others. A good support system is where the church comes in. I am impressed that our church helps persons pay for counseling when there is a need. I would hope that it can also be a place where, instead of burying our emotions deep within, we could also understand that vulnerability equals strength. I would hope folks coming to church would understand that no matter what, they are never truly alone, and that they're going to get through this. We offer support groups for those diagnosed with a mental illness. But what of the rest of the 20 to 30% who also struggle with mental health? Those were the percentages before the pandemic. And the pandemic itself, by shaking our foundations, our belief in a safe world, by the deep sense of isolation it has caused, by some people feeling unsupported in their workplace and therefore more stressed, and by causing rifts in relationships, particularly in families. All of these factors have caused a dramatic increase in mental health challenges in the past 2.5 years. Austin Maddox, in an article called "What Does the Bible Say About Mental Illness?" reminds us that mental illness can affect any of us. Whether a pastor, Sunday school teacher, or faithful churchgoer, the suspected struggle of mental illness should not be a source of shame or be kept hidden. Church should be a safe place, a place of safety and community, where those who are struggling can be honest, ask people to rally around them in prayer, and be assisted in seeking professional help. He says, be available. Treat them as fellow image bearers. Walk with them, shouldering one another's burden in order to fulfill the law of Christ. Only then will we love as Christ loved and care well for those who are hurting." Unquote. Last Sunday, Joe talked about our need for the church. The women's group at my church when I was living in a rural setting was where I first shared my struggles. My feelings were heard and validated, and it was one of those church women who followed up and suggested counseling. I hope that our church is a safe place where we can talk about our struggles with mental health. One of my hopes is to somehow make available material that I received via email in June. It comes from an organization called Sanctuary Mental Health, which for me had credibility because it includes Dr. John Swinton, whom I heard speak at a conference in Regina a number of years ago. Sanctuary Mental Health offers a study guide intended to raise awareness and start conversations in churches regarding faith and mental health. It is designed for people with questions about mental health professionals with a wealth of knowledge to share, leaders who want to engage in their community in mental health conversations, people supporting loved ones with mental health problems, and people living with mental health problems. This is an 8-week course, and because I'm not sure that folks would come to that many sessions on a weeknight, it may be that we'll have to find some other way to offer it. And if you're interested in pursuing this, please let me know. The church is a place where we are invited into relationship with God and with each other. As people wanting to help, we don't actually have to do a lot. We don't have to ask any questions, don't have to offer any advice or unsolicited counsel, because we are not an expert on these things. We only need to be present to one another, respect one another, and allow God's peace to flow through us to the other. John Elias says we may have good institutions, psychiatrists, psychologists, and we may need them at times, but they are no substitute for friends and neighbors. They don't replace a caring community. I haven't asked him, but I expect he would say we need both. This meme says it well. A friend is someone who helps you up when you're down, and if they can't, they lay down beside you and listen. Here's a brief clip from Sanctuary Mental Health as to the importance of the church in supporting persons in their mental health.
The church is made up of people, and people and their experiences of suffering matter to God. And so when we think about why mental health issues should matter to Christians and to the church, it's because people and people's suffering should matter to the church, and because it matters to God. And ideally, if I take it a bit further, I want to think about how the church is called to be a place that is healing, that extends love and compassion to essentially the whole earth, where we are taking care of one another, where we are being the hands and the feet of God. And I don't think that that stops at some of the issues that we're comfortable talking about. I think that extends to the things that feel uncomfortable and that are foreign and maybe even invisible to many of us. So it's my hope that the church could actually be on the leading edge of caring for people, particularly with mental health issues and mental illness, because I think it is that close to the heart of God that people's suffering is not alone and is felt and seen and healed in community.
People's suffering should matter to the church because it matters to God. This is why we at Wildwood have an inclusion statement that basically reads, "With God's help, we will not discriminate in regard to any factors that may give rise to division and marginalization." Virginia Gerbrandt-Richert says, "Healing may not be within our power. It may not even be easy to diagnose or assess. But love and presence are within our power and are the greatest gifts we can give to anyone, especially those troubled and struggling for mental health." How do we do that? The final word goes to this story by A.A. Milne, which may be familiar to you. It occurred to Pooh and Piglet that they hadn't heard from Eeyore for several days, so they put on their hats and coats and trotted across the 100-acre wood to Eeyore's stick house. Inside the house was Eeyore. "Hello, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Hello, Pooh. Hello, Piglet," said Eeyore in a glum-sounding voice. "We just thought we'd check on you," said Piglet, "because we hadn't heard from you, and so we wanted to know if you were okay." Eeyore was silent for a moment. "Am I okay?" he asked eventually. "Well, I don't know, to be honest. Are any of us really okay? That's what I ask myself. All I can tell you, Pooh and Piglet, is that right now I feel rather sad and alone and not much fun to be around at all, which is why I haven't bothered you, because you wouldn't want to waste your time hanging out with someone who is sad and alone and not much fun to be around at all, would you now?" Pooh looked at Piglet, and Piglet looked at Pooh, and they both sat down, one on either side of Eeyore, in his stick house. Eeyore looked at them in surprise. "What are you doing?" "We're sitting here with you," said Pooh, "because we are your friends. And true friends don't care if someone is feeling sad or alone or not much fun to be around at all. True friends are there for you anyway. And so, here we are." "Oh," said Eeyore. "Oh." And the three of them sat there in silence, while Pooh and Piglet said nothing at all. And somehow, almost imperceptibly, Eeyore started to feel a tiny little bit better. Because Pooh and Piglet were there. No more, no less. This is us. And because God cares, we care. We can show that caring by simply being there. Because people and their suffering are near to the heart of God, may we as a church be a place of healing for hurting people, individually and collectively. No more and no less.